I decide to dig an artificial lake on my property. When I start the work, the president of the HOA shows up furious, saying that I didn't ask permission to change the landscape of the community. But my land isn't even part of the community. They call the town hall to stop my construction, but the inspector looks at the documents and says, I have full permission. When I bought my property, I wanted peace. No nosy neighbors, no stupid condominium rules, and, above all, no stupid bureaucracy telling me what to do. Just land, silence, and the freedom to build whatever I wanted. So when I decided to build an artificial lake, I didn't think anyone would mind. After all, it was my land. I spent months planning everything. I consulted experts, asked for permits from the town hall, and invested a lot of money to turn a dry piece of land into a beautiful lake. I could imagine the fish swimming around, the water sparkling in the sunset, and, of course, the silent envy of the few neighbors who could barely put up a fence without asking permission from the HOA's aesthetic committee across the road. The first stage began smoothly. Machines digging, trucks bringing in stones to reinforce the banks, workers sweating under the scorching sun. I watched contentedly, sipping a beer on the balcony until she appeared. The woman appeared out of nowhere, marching across my land as if she owned it. Her heels sunk into the soft earth, her face red with fury and that damn notebook that every authoritarian idiot loves to carry. Ah, I knew that type. She stood next to the work, snorting like a bull about to charge. When she finally opened her mouth, it was to inform me that I was breaking the community rules. I could only laugh inside. The HOA had absolutely nothing to do with my property. My house was across the road, far from the perfectly trimmed lawns and obligatory beige facades that condominium loved. But that didn't matter to her. The fact that someone nearby was doing something without asking permission seemed to drive the woman crazy. She started talking about how a lake could devalue the neighborhood, about how the HOA's environmental rules prohibited changes to the landscape without prior approval, and how I needed to stop the work immediately. But she forgot one detail. I wasn't part of the HOA. I hadn't signed any damn regulations. I didn't owe anything to that bunch of noble suburbanites, and above all, I had permission from the government to build the lake. So instead of arguing, I just smiled, raised my glass, and said, "Good luck trying to stop me." The woman stared at me, surprised at my lack of fear, but from her expression, I knew that this was far from over, and I was right. If I thought the woman was just going to accept my answer and get on with her life, I was sorely mistaken. The next day, the war began. I woke up to an annoying noise. It wasn't the machines building the lake. It was a whistle, loud, shrill, and repetitive. There she was, standing on the edge of my lot with a reflective vest and a clipboard, blowing that whistle as if she were controlling New York traffic. The scene was so ridiculous that it took me a while to understand what the hell was going on. Further on, a group of people, clearly their HOA doormats, were holding signs with messages like, "Save the natural landscape," and "Say no to visual pollution." Oh, right, visual pollution. Because a lake was an attack on the aesthetics of the neighborhood, but the condo's synthetic lawns and white fences looked like something out of a luxury magazine. The impromptu protest was like something out of a bad reality TV show. The group kept shouting slogans as if they were saving an Amazon rainforest instead of trying to block a simple artificial lake on a property that wasn't even theirs. And then came the icing on the cake. A black car pulled up in front of my driveway, and a man got out wearing a cheap jacket and an expression of forced importance. He introduced himself as an HOA environmental representative, which could only be a joke, because as far as I knew, HOA had no environmental authority whatsoever. He handed me an official notice demanding that I stop construction immediately because it was jeopardizing the ecological balance of the region. It was the most absurd thing I've ever seen. I had all the necessary permits. I had followed every rule imposed by the town hall, and above all, I was improving the biodiversity of the place. But, of course, the woman and her minions knew more than licensed environmental engineers and biologists. And that's when she decided to open her mouth. "You may think you have permission, but we have influence." The phrase kept echoing in my head. It wasn't about the lake. It was about control. It was about a bunch of people who couldn't stand it if someone didn't follow their ridiculous rules. They couldn't force me to join the HOA, but they wanted to find any loophole to bend me to their will. Unfortunately for them, I wasn't the type to bend easily. The woman gave me a triumphant look. thinking she had scared me, but deep down, I knew that this was only the beginning, and I was ready for the next round. I'd like to say that that ridiculous theater was the end of the clowning, but no. The protest the day before was just a warm-up for the real tomfoolery the woman was planning. The next day, I realized that the sabotage had begun. I arrived at the construction site early in the morning, as I always did, but I found something strange. All the construction signs were gone. What's more, one of the safety barriers had fallen down, lying on the ground as if it had been forcibly ripped off. It seemed like a clear message. Someone wanted to stop the progress of the lake. I tried to ignore it. After all, I knew exactly who was behind it. But then, when I went to talk to the workers, I heard the worst news of the day. "Boss, we had to stop digging. The company that delivers the stones and cement canceled the contract." I frowned. "What do you mean they canceled?" I picked up the phone and called the supplier, and what I heard made me laugh nervously. Someone from the HOA had called them claiming to be the owner of the land and saying that the work had been canceled. Evidently, the woman not only thought she was in charge of everything around her, but was also willing to lie blatantly to stop the lake from being built. Fortunately, after a firm conversation and some proof that I was the real owner of the property, the supplier agreed to reactivate the contract. But the problem was already clear. She wasn't going to stop. And I was right. The next morning, I woke up to a strong smell of garbage. A lot of garbage. I went out to look, and guess what? Someone had dumped bags and bags of waste right at the entrance to my property. And it wasn't just normal food waste or cardboard. There was building rubble, pieces of wood, and even broken furniture. It was obvious that this was no coincidence. I called the town hall to report the illegal dumping, and that's when the most interesting detail came. The material had been dumped by a truck registered to the HOA. But the best part came a few hours later, when she showed up again, this time with a victorious smile on her face. "Did you see that your land is starting to turn into a dump? I think it might be time to reconsider that lake." My blood boiled, but I took a deep breath. I wasn't going to fall into her trap. If she wanted war, fine. But I would play it the right way. And this time, I would make sure to return the favor. If that woman thought I was going to surrender after the ridiculous protest, the lies to my suppliers, and the mountain of garbage dumped in my driveway, then she didn't know me at all. After the illegal dumping of rubble, I called the town hall and demanded a formal investigation. Sure, the HOA had influence, but nothing could buy the silence of a well-done environmental inspection. And while they were at it, I was already preparing my own response. I knew that the woman and her HOA henchmen hated anything that disrupted the perfect look of their condominium. They wanted beige houses, white fences, and impeccable lawns, as if they lived in an advertising catalog. So I decided to make a small adjustment to my work. That afternoon, I hired a company to install the biggest billboard my budget would allow, right on the side of the road that separated my property from the condominium. And what was written on it? "If you're reading this, know that this area is not part of HOA. My land, my rules." It was a gift for the residents of the condominium, who would now be forced to look at it every day when they left and entered their homes. Even better, the billboard was 100% legal. But I didn't stop there. Since the HOA was so concerned about the environmental impact of my lake, I decided to show them what a real environmental impact looked like. I talked to a local group of biologists and got permission to bring ducks and some other waterfowl into the space once the pond was ready. I wanted to see the woman have the nerve to say that a real natural habitat was an ecological problem. And then, the next morning, as expected, she showed up again. Only this time, she wasn't alone. Next to her were two policemen and a guy in a suit who seemed to be carrying an official document. The woman got out of the car with a smug smile and a triumphant look on her face. "You've been notified. Congratulations. Your work is now officially embargoed." I took the document and started reading. It was an environmental complaint against me, sent by the HOA. Of course, when sabotage and threats didn't work, now she was trying to stop me in court. What she didn't know was that I already had something even better up my sleeve. If she thought it was going to end like this, she was sorely mistaken. The woman stood there with her arrogant little smile, thinking she had won. I could see in her eyes that she felt on top of the world. The HOA had finally found a way to put me in my place. The embargo was their final weapon, the card to force me to give up. The problem? I'm not the type to give up. I picked up the document and read it calmly. The accusation was that the construction of my lake was destroying the natural landscape and compromising the local ecosystem. Funny, isn't it? Because I had official authorization from the town hall and the environmental agency. And not only did I have authorization, I already knew that this attempted blockade was going to happen. Because while the HOA was busy sabotaging me, I was anticipating it. Even before the work began, I had contacted environmental experts and carried out an ecological impact study. The report showed that not only would the artificial lake not cause any damage, it would also help the region's biodiversity. Even better, I had already sent all this documentation to the town hall before the HOA tried to stop the project. So instead of getting nervous, I simply called the environmental inspector's office. On the other end of the line, the person in charge of the case answered, and I got straight to the point. I've received an embargo notice from the HOA, but I think there's something strange about it. How can a private body issue a complaint against a project that has already been approved by you? The inspector's silence lasted a few seconds. Then he asked for a photo of the document. I sent it to him. 2 minutes later, he replied, "This is illegal. This notification has no value. I'll send someone now." And that's when everything turned against her. Less than an hour later, an official municipal car pulled up in my driveway. An inspector got out with a folder in his hand and went straight to the policeman. The woman tried to intervene, but he completely ignored her and opened the documents. It was beautiful to watch. He dismantled every ridiculous accusation right there. He showed that my pond complied with all the regulations, that the HOA's complaint was unfounded, and, best of all, that they had no authority whatsoever to embargo anything. And then came the best part. The inspector took another document out of his briefcase and handed it to the woman. I almost felt sorry for her when I saw her face lose all color. The HOA was being fined for legal harassment and for trying to use undue influence over a legally approved project. She tried to argue, but the inspector only cut her off with a dry tone. "If you insist on this, we can open an investigation into abuse of authority by the HOA. I don't think this would be a good time for that, right?" Oh, how ironic. The woman who had spent weeks trying to bar me was now seeing the HOA take a lawsuit back. In the end, not only did I continue with my work, but I made sure to double my bet. As soon as the lake was finished, I put up a huge sign on the side of the road. "Welcome to Liberty Lake, a no HOA property." And to make sure everyone knew I wasn't leaving anytime soon, I organized a grand opening with a barbecue, live music, and invited all the neighbors who were tired of the HOA rules. The woman never showed up again, but they say that, to this day, she looks away every time she passes my pond. Well, every time I see the reflection of the sun on the water, I remember that some wars are worth fighting. Have you ever tried to take over what's yours without having any rights? Let me know in the comments. And if you like this story, don't forget to like it and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Want to see more videos? Click on card and don't waste any time. See you in the next one.